our connection with our earthly wild nature. This is pre-civilization. Civilization is a organizing strategy of the mind gone to its extreme. This is where these two primal forces really that I believe hold the balance between life, and one is what we might call love, and one is what we might call fear, and they balance each other. One expands, one contracts. One is the summer and the spring, one is the winter and the autumn. One brings us open, opens up our heart. The other brings us deep into our body. Now fear is this, people talk about just get rid of fear. Incredible. Nature survives off of an energy we call fear. Nature, everything in nature has that inbuilt within us. Because that, otherwise we're just walking around in this bubble. And imagine human beings landing, or wherever we come from on this planet, cold, naked, not much fur on us, looking pretty odd really. Not much to defend ourselves, really, when we look at nature. So we had to adapt and we had to survive. Now this energy is so powerful. It's so powerful that if a leader manipulates it, it can bring a nation from its knees, i.e. Germany, in between the wars, and to this machine that builds. People go beyond their limits. Beyond their limits with courage, they go beyond their limits with bravery, facing up and building things. This is an extraordinary energy. It has such a power to it. And yet we give it away to our leaders, or supposed leaders. Or we project it on them and say, well, they're coming from a very dark place. They're full of fear. But that's because we haven't taken responsibility for or found a decent relationship. Now, fear has a spirit to it, like anything. We have to find a decent relationship with that spirit, one that isn't going to destroy us. So we then don't act out these destructive urges that the human being has. The Shuar in Ecuador, in the Amazon, they have a philosophy, I was told, about whether it was the men's job to fight each other and to kill each other, basically. This intertribal warfare, they're a very warrior race. But that was seen ultimately as a good thing because it kept the population in balance, so it never outgrew the forest and then started destroying the forest. But the culture knew that if the men were just left to their own devices, they would just get addicted to that destructive force and they would go on destroying. So it was the women's role to control the men. Hence that a lot of shamanic cultures are matriarchal. So this is where these creative, destructive forces, this is the primal fears and the primal terrors that we all contain within us, are contained in our body soul. No wonder most people spend most of the time wanting to open up and expand out here, because it feels much more spacious, or it feels much more enlightening. It does take us to the light. But what about going into the earth, into the shadow? Now, why did we do this? Well, I believe because we had this last 2,000 years of this transcendental religions, philosophies. The earth no longer became our home. Our home was somewhere else. We were cast off. And this you can see in the mythos of particularly the last 1,000 years here, but the last 2,000 years of the Christianity, that God is always somewhere else. And freedom is always seen as somewhere else. Home is seen as always somewhere else. It's not connected to the earth. Now, indigenous people don't have, it's what they call the scapegoat archetype. It's an ancient archetype that we've embraced a bit too much. And the scapegoat actually comes from the Old Testament, the Bible. Every year, 2 goats were sacrificed. The first goat, they would cut the throat of, and that would be the offering to God. The second goat, they would whisper all the sins, all the transgressions, all the taboos that had been broken over the previous year, because when you get a bunch of human beings together, there needs to be rules, but obviously people are going to need to break them as well. That's just human nature. So they would whisper onto the goat, and then they would drive the goat out of the village, hence the word escape. It comes from escape, goat. Now that goat was then carrying all the sins, everything, all the evil, if you like, of the people, and they were cleansed. It's an ancient cultures all across the world have a tradition is like this, a scapegoat tradition. It doesn't have to be the goats that hold that energy. Often it can be human beings. Often in traditional cultures, that would be the role of the shaman. So if there's any trouble in a culture, the shaman's the first to get blamed, often. But the shaman would learn to be able to rise their energy to such a power that they were able to transmute or release these sicknesses. This fear. Fear is the grandparent of all sickness, I believe. They would be able to take them on, literally, and then often they would go off into the jungle or into the forest, and they would literally vomit them out. They were the purifiers, if you like. Now that role got lost, so then we had a religion where it was built around this archetype of the scapegoat. Jesus is the ultimate scapegoat, taking everyone's sins, cleansing and purifying. But what happens is this scapegoat is so strong, this archetype is so strong in the Western world because the scapegoat can never feel at home in the world. The scapegoat is always an exile, is always an outsider. Now, I don't know if many of you here, because when I go into alternative communities often, people or healers hold this energy of the scapegoat very strongly. They're usually the ones that are a bit odd, rejected by the family, holding the pain of everyone else in the community, which no one is talking about. And so but what has happened is we've lost the power, if you like, to be able to meet this energy of sickness and transmute it and be able to then come back into society. To realize that just because we're holding a load of this pain and this negative energy, it doesn't mean to say we haven't got a home here on the earth. Now, the way I believe we can do this, and the power, is through ceremony. Because ceremony creates the container whereby we can begin to bring up these destructive forces. Most shamanic ceremony involves, as I was chatting to someone recently, some kind of ordeal, basically. You're either taking a load of plants and puking up most of the night and facing your most horrendous demons, or you're sweating and being absolutely seared to death by the heat of hot rocks in a sweat lodge, or you're fasting for 4 days and then sitting out in nature for 4 days on your own and then coming back and then having another 4 days fasting. You have to go to your edges. It takes you to your edges. That's why I believe I had that initiation for so long. That was my training, really. That was my best training. Because we have to know where those edges are. And we have to be broken down enough in order to get back into our right relationship with nature and with the earth. And this is something that can be done in ceremony. Ceremony is the great container. Indigenous cultures, if you ask them where the center of the world is, they'd always say that mountain, that rock, or that lake. They always have a point in their topography, in where they live, where the center of the world is. Now, this used to do my head in, because I'd be thinking, well, if that's the center of the world there, what about this center? And what about the other center that people say there? How can there be more than one center? And where's mine? Where's my center of the world? Is it the shopping center in the high street? Well, then I realized we have a need to be connected to the center of the world. And this comes through our navel here, because when we did our most powerful dreaming, which was in the womb, when we literally dreamt ourselves into being, we were in the mother. We were in the womb of the mother, connected through the navel to her. We were not separate. And then the minute we come out into this world, that is cut. and we become separate. I believe in the West, because the rituals and the ceremonies haven't been in place, that separation anxiety is what is driving a lot of our neurotic behavior. Because what indigenous cultures realize, once that connection is cut, then it has to be grown again. We have to exist at the center of the world. But then we have to be connected with the real mother, Mother Earth. And if you're connected with the Mother Earth, there's one thing imagining and thinking you're connected to the Mother Earth, but what about having a place where you can go to praise the center of the earth, to have your ceremonies at the center of the earth? As human beings, we often need it to be, we need to experience things in the physical realm to believe them, because what I call the body soul, or the unconscious, it needs to feel it, it needs to experience it. Ritual is the bridge between the worlds. You have the invisible world of spirit, where a lot of all this stuff comes from, all the creations that we've ever created, all the healing that can manifest. But we want it to manifest. If I'm doing a healing on someone, I can do the most spectacular energy work in the world. I can take out all their poisons. I can bring back parts of their soul and everything. But if they walk back into their lives and just behave in exactly the same way, then it might not necessarily work. Ritual has to be the bridge. Now, ceremony contains us in the world. Every time we do a ceremony, what we're basically doing is we're bringing back the earth to life. And we are participating in that renewal and rebirth of the earth. It's a beautiful ceremony. I started off in New Mexico in the desert, and with the sacred land of the Huicholi, a tribe from Mexico. They're very pure with their traditions. They never were dominated. They were never taken over by the Spanish who invaded Mexico. So their traditions are very, very pure. And they have this sacred land in the mountain, the Huiracuta. And that's where their sacrament, the peyote, grows, this strange little cactus. So I began my teaching there many, many years ago, but the Huicholi were very closed down then. They were very, very protective of their traditions because they didn't want it infected. What has happened since is in the last 5 years, a mining corporation, the Mexican government has given a Canadian company mining rights in their sacred land. Now this has forced the Huicholi to come out. So I didn't meet them 15 years ago, or 13, I can't even remember, when I started my training. But now they've begun to come out. Now they come to the woods where I do my training, and we do ceremony together, which is, it feels like a beautiful round, I don't know how that's happened, but a beautiful round circle, if you like. And a beautiful gift it is to sit with people who have had an unbroken, and they've had an unbroken teacher. It's probably the oldest teacher plant tradition in the world. Anthropologists, they're always going to say one thing or argue, I don't know. When we say the oldest, we usually mean the best. I mean, that's the kind of coda, if we're like talking on this level. It's our kind of justification, if you like. But they're an old tradition. And they work in this ceremony where you ingest the peyote, which is this sacrament. It's a cactus, which will connect you with your hearts, really. It's a beautiful heart opening. And it also connects you with anything that is standing in the way of your heart being open. Connects you with all your blockages, all the mind poisons, things like that. So it's not always an easy ceremony, but it is a beautiful ceremony. And the Maracama, who is the shaman, will sing 5 songs in the night. The first song is the song of the lonely orphan. And that's the song of us human beings. That's the song that honors the fact that we feel somehow separate from where we came from. And that we have once again got ourselves out of alignment with life, with nature. Our trickster natures have once again sent us off track. And that's why we're coming back into ceremony. So that is the first song. And then over the night, he sings 5 songs. I mean, they're long songs. And to be honest, forget any kind of plants, or don't forget them, but it's actually the songs are much more important than the ingestion. That's why when people start studying the plants and trying to look at what is the active ingredient, they're going up a blind alleyway. The active ingredient is the Murakami, the shaman, the ayahuasquero, whoever's holding the ceremony, and their ability to sing the songs of the plants. because that brings us into communion. So over the night, these 5 songs are sung until sunrise in the morning. And the last song sings the sun back up to life. Back up. Now they believe, as a lot of indigenous cultures, if we stop singing the sun back up to life, if we stop engaging with that creative process that every day is, then the world will die. Now I used to look around and I thought, well, we stopped doing that years ago. We've just been getting on with our life in the West, but we're still alive. But then I realized something had died, something profound had died, and that was the spirit. It's an extraordinary experience when you come into a group of people with all their disparate needs in a circle at the beginning of the ceremony, and some people might be full of jealousies or envies or greed or anger. They might be upset. They might have just had an argument with their kids or whatever, with their partners. It's human life, isn't it? I mean, conflict actually is a huge part of human life. It's a huge part of nature. So when people start off, by the end of the night, by the morning, we've come back into unity. And we've come back into community. But at the same time, not just with the person sitting next to me or the person sitting opposite me or the circle even, but we've come back into community with the whole of existence. Because we, through our efforts, have actually sung up that sun. We've become this active part of the creative process. Now, some people might have purged during the night. They might have rid themselves of toxins. They might be doing it on behalf of someone else in the circle. How empowering is that? To realize that we as human beings can sit at the center of existence and become once more a part of the center of existence in a ceremony. And we can renew the world. It's incredible. And that's, I feel, what is needed now. That is the power of ceremony. And when you do that, or when you do another kind of ceremony, when we spend all night drumming around a fire, going wild in the woods, and I can bring the consciousness of a stag into me and merge my spirit with a stag, who again is my ancestor, because he is older than me. He is then closer to the source of life, hasn't left the garden, so to speak. When I can merge my consciousness, it's like being plugged into the mains, if you like, and I get the power of that stag, but also I build this soulful relationship with this animal, then it becomes much, much, much harder to act in a destructive way in the world, even if I want to. Because there is a visceral, emotional bond that I have. And it's the same if you sit out all night in a ceremony with the peyote, and then when the sun rises in the morning, it is a miracle. It is the most profound miracle that you can ever witness. And you feel that in your heart, you feel it in your gut, you feel it everywhere. And then I also know that I'm intimately connected with all of that land. I am become a part of the land again. And this is what I really wanted to talk about. Because at the same time as particularly the last 1,000 years, we've been taught a process of body shaming. Religions have taught us to disconnect from the body, to feel shameful of the body, to feel shameful of the body's desires, the body's appetites. And at the same time we were taught, or this was the ethos of body shaming, at the same time, land grabbing went on. And I think they're intimately related. Because in this land, we colonized this land first. And then it was such a good system. It went out over the world. It was exported. And it's gone everywhere you've gone, indigenous people have been shamed with their traditions, shamed with their beliefs. And what it does is it creates a disconnect. Once you disconnect from your body, you disconnect from your land, you are no longer the center of the universe, you're no longer the center of the world. What then happens is you become disconnected and you start acting up. You start acting in destructive ways. Or you might go, and this is recorded, you might go into a consciousness of waiting for something to come along to save you.